Esports and Coffee, Corkboard Connections. My name is Jacquie Lamb, and I will be our second host to this new series. I'm one of our co-founders of ENC, and Corkboard Connections was created to meet new and upcoming talent within the esports and educational ecosystem, as well as taking a deep dive into important topics within our ecosystem. Today, I have Karen Ruggles here to chat with me about some of the programs and projects she has working, and I'm really excited to talk to you. Karen, want to go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away?
Sure. Thank you for that. I'm really excited to be a part of this, and been following esports and coffee I think since the beginning. So I'm really excited just to be invited to the space and talk to some of the people who've become friends over the months and I guess even years. Can we put a plural on that one now? So very excited just to see the growth happening in esports and coffee and be a part of that.
Thanks. Okay, give us a brief introduction about your background. You're a professor. You're also an esports director. How did you get involved into both worlds?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have been teaching at DeSales University in Pennsylvania for 10 years, I believe. This might be my 11th year. And that's the full-time docket, I suppose. I was adjuncting a little bit prior to that. I came to teaching because I have, and I feel like I found this over the years. I have this fondness for connecting with people and making sure that they're in a safe place to learn about themselves and about something that they're passionate about. So I do think maybe for the first couple of years that I was teaching at the undergraduate level, I go through a lot of self-reflection, and through that process, I really identified something core to my space, which isn't necessarily teaching, but it's just that idea of creating the safe place, and that has really informed a lot of the extra stuff that I do in terms of esports, which this is my 6th year as the varsity esports program director, and that was, me coming into that space was really about me creating a safe place for gaming students to learn about themselves, learn about competition, make friends, lose gracefully, win gracefully, because there is a lot to be learned from a varsity athletic program that we do see in traditional field sports. But, a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there is a non-zero contingent within my esports rosters over the years that have, not been able to participate in traditional field sports, whether that's disability status or time or ability, physical ability. So why can't those people also benefit from the same type of engagement that a varsity athletic program brings to the table? So it's been a really frustrating and enjoyable ride to bring that up from literally scratch and just try my best to do the best for the students and for that space, and learning with them. They learn from me, I learn from them, which is a huge part of teaching. Those have been sort of the two main branches of my professional career. There are other branches as well that are more on my focus, which is digital art and 3D animation, which isn't really this space to talk about it here, but it is something that is very near and dear to my heart.
Being a professor is, it's still in this space though. Gaming and digital art, it can still be in coding. We've talked about that before too.
Yeah, sure. I think in a lot of ways I'm very much all over the place, and I think that probably resonates with a lot of the listeners to this program, and saying, you have this core of the gaming and the community that's there, and that's why we're here, and that's why we look to connect, and we're looking to do better, right, and push the ecosystem to its most pristine state that we all can kind of see. But we need to elevate it to that, and I think we're inspired to do that because we value what we have touched in some way, that feeling of belonging, engagement, whatever it is. I mean, everybody sort of fills in their own blank. And I think what's really interesting about the gaming community and esports as sort of a subset of that is that it's sort of just like any other community. I mean, like if you go to the gym or if you're involved in like your church or like your synagogue or whatever it is, that's a community, right? And you learn about different people through that similar column, but there's no replication really. And if it is, I feel like that's not a really healthy community. If everybody is just like the same entity, then there is nothing sort of challenging that community to really be the best that it can be. And I think that that's where I really love what Esports and Coffee is doing, because it is intentionally trying to find the community members who, you know, we can learn from each other, and we're not just shouting into an echo chamber.
Well, thank you, and you're a huge part of that too. We appreciate.
I don't know. I like One Good Thing Wednesday, and like that's
you do so much for the community though. Every time
I just I like Purple Heart everything.
You do, and you also I was gonna talk about this later, but we can bring it up now. Like you. Like, even for me, like, just talking about my own personal journey, you comment and you help push me. And I feel like I help push you as well. But you always comment about people, like, when they struggle, you remind them to keep going and to keep pushing themselves. And even just that one comment can really affect someone's ability to keep moving forward. And I want to say thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I really do appreciate that. I think that's something that will resonate with the entire like gaming community at large. But I feel like, at least in sort of my day, gaming wasn't as like prevalent as it is now. And I think, at the higher tier, it's definitely sort of in the similar aspect. It's not just like, oh, it's a hobby or whatever. But I feel like it was, you're sort of put into this column of like maybe a weirdo or like can't fit in or like you're in your mom's basement, like those types of general, just prejudices against what it meant to have fun on a computer. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, And so I feel like in some cases that sort of like weird label has made people, and myself included, into this, space where you hear that a lot, right? Or you hear this negativity and you experience that negativity. And I'm not saying that has gone away at all. I just think that, my experience is different than maybe a lot of the like younger crowd that might be listening. So I think everybody can kind of resonate with that. But then when you get into this community where, someone is like, hey, I see you, and it's like cool to see you, and I want to see you, and I want to know more about you, and you can feel that that's a genuine thing. It can be sort of not off-putting, but it can be a little bit of a shock. You're like, whoa, I haven't quite felt that warmth from a lot of people. So it really does mean something. And I think that it's important, and I talk to my students about this all the time, to verbalize some of those things, and not just if you see somebody who's like, oh, wow, they look really nice today. Like we just jumped on before and I was like, wow, what a nice shirt, and it's like, it seems so innocuous and just so like, well, who cares, but I think just verbalizing those pieces are so important. I think a lot of and this is like a whole other can of worms, but the whole idea of like friendship and intimacy and connection is very much lost. And I think that there is so much to be, and I think this is true not just for like a specific gender or identity or something like that, because I do feel like young men or people who present as men, they are kind of in a shorter, like they get a shorter stick with that because there is this perception of like needing to be stoic or strong or not cry or what have you. And there is, in my opinion, a little bit more leniency for women to express themselves in that way. Although in some cases it's like, well, now she's being dramatic, or whatever. So I do think that that has put this sort of like wet blanket or this limitation on people from expressing their feelings. And it puts a lot of people in negative spaces, myself included. It's it's sort of like that old adage, like if you see something, say something, but like in a good way. Like I feel like we can do this in a positive way that's lifting people up and encouraging them. And to your point, to challenge people too. Like you don't just have to be that echo chamber or be that yes man in the room that's like, oh yes, you look great, you look great, you look great. It's like now you're going to dilute it to the point where it doesn't make any sense. But to be like, hey, like let's do this together, let's go as a community. And just when you need to be lifted up, that happens, and sometimes you get lifted up in return. I think that's the sign of a healthy community.
I love where this went, and I'm even gonna
derail
us just a little bit more before we get back onto our topics. But you reminded me about like connections, and I've been wanting to talk about this for just a little bit too, and how it's so important to just make genuine connections with people. Like we talk about esports every single day, and it's hard when you go to conferences or when you're in groups and all you do is talk about esports. And I think it's really important to resonate with people outside of like the physicalness of esports and what are you coaching? How are you coaching? Like making genuine connections. So I was talking to Chris Bilski the other day, and he's got a new kid. And so I send him funny TikToks all the time. I'm like, this is what you have to look forward to when your daughter gets this age.
Good luck, Bilski. We love you. Right? You're doing great. Yeah.
And then we chat about that, and then I just feel bad. I hope he listens to this because we were talking about emotions and crying, and he was telling me how he is an emotional guy and that he lets it show. And I love that because when he starts watching Disney movies again, because he will, and all the other movies, 100%. You're gonna cry. It just comes out. I was watching I watch movies every morning with my son, and it's like, I'm not crying. Nope, it's just falling out. But
it's just part of my functioning.
Yeah, but I think it's important to make those other types of connections besides just like talking about gaming and esports with our peers and our connections, and making those personal connections with people so that we have time together and that it's not just gaming.
Yeah, I agree. I think like anything else, I'm a big proponent for just self-reflection and like learning about yourself. I feel like we find ourselves in however you want to phrase that, like your consciousness or your soul or whatever it is, but we find ourselves in these bodies, right? And so we're learning, and our bodies change all the time, and our thoughts and what we experience and our education and our exposure to other people, like that is constantly evolving. And I do believe there are some like core tenets that every person has, and that might kind of fluctuate a little bit, but at the end of the day, I don't think it like deviates to an intense degree. So I think that's what I was alluding to before, and this idea of something that is like that core tenet for me is just helping people. Like that's really important to me, and that really speaks to my soul. So I think with that in mind, because I was able to kind of find that, experience that, like, review really important points of my life, that I was like, well, why was that important? Why does my mind go there when I sit down to reflect on important things of my life, or whatever like the frame of reference is? And if you continue to ask that question, why, in terms of like your own emotional experience, and I think you start to get to those 1, 2, 3 maybe core tenets that are you, right? And then so from there, that can help you guide your steps, right? And correct, right? Because we all go off the path, and we all make wrong decisions, and we think it's right, and then we find out like, whoa, that wasn't great, and it's really trying to get it back to that tenet and say, address that. And I think that's where talking to other people, and I think where I'm trying to go with this in terms of interpersonal relationships is, understanding what makes you tick and understanding why, and then using that as a metric to push the connections that you have. So for example, some people might have different categories of interpersonal relationships, like acquaintance, friend, loved one, etc. But then like, what does that mean, right? If we're a friend or an acquaintance, and I think it gets so simplified like that because our language is just not expressive enough. And I was an English major, so it's like I got a lot of words at my disposal, but it's just not expressive enough to have all of the level of emotional connection that we can express. So you might say so and so is my friend, and then also say this person is my friend, and it's two completely different friendships, right? This person I would feel very comfortable hugging for 2 minutes straight, and like we're having a moment, and this person, like, we're good with a handshake. You know what I mean? And they're still both my friends, but it's like a different emotional connection. So we don't have this idea of like friendship where it has those tiers or that like gradient of comfort or of that intimacy. And I think a lot of times people think of like intimacy and they think of like a sexual partner or someone that they're interested in romantically. I'm like, well, no, I have, my best friend, I have incredibly intimate conversations with, but I've never been sexually attracted to her. Like it's just not part of that friendship. So it's just one of those things where I feel like we aren't specifically, at least in the United States, or at least the part of the United States that I grew up in, we're not really encouraged to have those, or instructed, like we don't have those types of conversations about intimacy. It feels like it's almost like 0 to 100, because at the end of the day, very similar to the way that sort of esports is coming up, you put a bunch of kids in a room and you just let them govern themselves, right? So if you have a bunch of 13-year-olds who are feeling a lot of feelings, they're going to express that in a way that's it's very trial and error, right? And you're not really in a position, because it feels awkward, right, when you're at that age, to have a conversation with your mom or like your mom's best friend or whoever you feel close to as that like adult entity, to be like, hey, I'm attracted to so and so, and like, what do I do with those feelings? I don't think those conversations are really happening, and therefore it's very inside your head. So we don't get this whole like, well, that's fine if you have those feelings, but like, let's talk about consent, and like, let's talk about what you need to do to be appropriate for your body. And so I think I feel like I derailed us completely.
That's okay. That's
But
okay.
I think it is, there are a lot of parallels to esports in general, in sort of like a weird way, because I'm very excited, because at the end of the day, there are very toxic behaviors that exist in esports that go unstructured. It's because it's unstructured. And I'm not saying that everything has to have structure. Like you can have play and just play and like run around in a field, you know what I mean? And just like what have you. But to have those who came before me and who do I trust to guide me through this, or ask a question of, very much relates to that same idea of how do we involve ourselves in a community? How do we involve ourselves with interpersonal relationships? And how does that expression make us a better human, right? And express those core tenets that are so important to me and that make me who I am. And I think, communities like Esports and Coffee give us that place to go, right? To like just talk, but also have really heavy things, bring that to the table, and have people suggest a solution or commiserate or say, hey, I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I've seen all of these conversations, and it doesn't have to be in person. We're almost always just like texting it through type of thing. So it's just I think it's a really interesting, you could tell like I'm still sort of grappling with this in my thought space, but I think it is a very interesting way that we have contemporarily evolved the way that we as humans connect with one another.
I love where that just went. The whole
Do
thing.
you? Okay,
yeah.
good.
No, I thought it was great. Thank you for that. And thank you for expressing all of that. No, and we talked about this before too, and that's what this whole series is about, so that's okay. Okay. We're gonna swing back a little bit about your program.
A little bit or a lot of it?
No, just a little bit. What are some aspects of your program that are unique or that set you apart from other programs or organizations?
Um, my esports program?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty typical to be quite honest with you. One thing I do love, and I think maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment, but I do love this time of a young person's trajectory and who they are becoming. I swear I'm not going to like derail again and talk about intimacy, but this idea of undergraduate time, if that is the choice that makes the most sense for usually the young person, doesn't always have to be, but this is the time that they're encouraged to ask questions and really looking to see who they are, and trying to push that. So it's sort of a larger quantity of what we were mentioning before, this like safe area to really expose, that internal guidance and have a community there who's going to support you. So I feel like that is one of the driving forces that I approach esports. This is this group of people's one community at least, and that's what I'm trying to facilitate. Is this is a healthy community. I think like any other program, it sort of ebbs and flows through that, because anytime you get into competition and people are putting in the time, and there's going to be frustrations in teams and whatnot. So I'm not like all rose-colored glasses, but that's my goal. That's sort of like my North Star, is always to try to make sure that the students are in a good place to bond, to make really wonderful connections, have great conversations, great competition, work hard, and really make this time, this very short time in their life when they're becoming that butterfly, to grow. And if the program is not doing that, that's where I try to find like what is the source of that, and how can we, either as a team or as the director, how can I readjust the ship so that we're all kind of heading through this storm together.
I know my time, if I had a program when I had first started college, because I did go to MSU, if there had been one, I know that I wouldn't have dropped out. Like I dropped out because I couldn't handle it, and I ended up going to a 2-year school and graduating from there. But if it had been around, because I have been a gamer and wanting to be gaming my whole life, and if this had been around when I was there, I feel like I would have had that sense of community and had some people to speak to and wanted to stay in school, had a reason to have a path towards graduation, because that's one of the points of being in a program, is to do well to graduate, but then also to stick with the program. And that's something that it happened. But
yeah, I hear that a lot, from especially, I'm going to go ahead and say our generation.
Yeah.
But like people like my older brother, who was the one, my one older brother who was the one who, I connect gaming with, and like how I sort of came up gaming was really as his like co-pilot, so to speak. You know what I mean? So we talk about it a lot. And he was like, man, if this was a thing, and I think that's true. And I think that that's something that is a good validation for everyone. And I also think in a lot of ways, for him in particular, I think he spent too much time gaming at different time stages of his life. So I think, one of the things that I find some of my students do is when they're coming to college, they are a little bit nervous about the time management, and are, because of all of the freedom, are they going to spend too, like have that temptation and just kind of get sucked into that vortex, and then you wake up and you didn't do any of your homework, and now you're failing, and everything is kind of steering you from to a different location. And I do have some students who express that to me. They're like, well, I would love to be part of this team, but I'm a little bit nervous about what that means. And I have students who say, well, if I'm not in the arena, I'm not gaming, right? And like that is my time to do that. And whether that works or not is kind of up for grabs. But I think that that's just another way that young people can kind of push through that idea of time management, which I think is so important. You should be learning how to time manage coming out of college, or at least like being introduced to some of those core principles, so that you can, navigate some of the more complex stages of life, like having kids and having to now time manage for that young individual as well as your young individual, and just any type of engagement that involves, like even if it's just not just, but like if it's a volunteer thing, right? If you're being engaged with professional development or something like that, that's another area that's a different dimension of what you're doing that needs that like ability to be nurtured and have growth so you can have fulfillment, but you also can't let that impact the way that your traditional functioning is going to allow you to kind of keep getting paid, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know what the down with the man. I don't know. I don't know how to balance that statement, but there it is.
So you have several projects and programs, and one of them was the student rep program with NACE.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that process started and kind of what the program is today?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to name drop Joey on this one. I think he was my biggest. There was definitely more people at the table there, but he was probably the first one that I spoke to, and I think he may have DM'd me. So I would have to go back. This is a few years now, but regardless, we were noticing that the NACE Constitution bylaws doesn't have like a right, so to speak, of students to voice any type of complaint or whatever like that would have to funnel up through the director. And if the director is like toxic, then how does that voice get heard was really what baited me into the pool, as well as just like trying to develop opportunities for competitors and hear what they, give them a space to self-direct and really push towards things that are important to them. So we spent about a year just kind of gathering information, having conversations with a group of students. I think there was about 20 or 30 students in that initial cohort to just say, what's important to you? Like, you should drive this. We're not going to tell you what your mission is. We want to hear, like, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, and whatever you want to talk about. So from those conversations that spanned more an academic year, I don't want to say full calendar year, although I guess we did go into the summer. But Joey and I helped sort of put together what that mission would look like. And, obviously brought it back to the students, and they helped write it as well and said, is this accurate? Should we change things? And that eventually turned into the proposal that we brought forward to NACE to include the SRP, the Student Representative Program, into NACE. And it was important to me that, students were the biggest voice here, and that they were the ones electing their representative. The representatives were electing the board, and it wasn't the director being like, oh, take this student, like this is our rep.
Mm-hmm.
Because that just sort of defeats the purpose. So that like interference idea of a member kind of cherry picking is not really what I'm interested in, because then you get a very limited scope. But if the students are doing that and the students say, yes, this, Jacquie is our person, we voted, she's in, that's good enough for me. I think that's wonderful. And so, we had this sort of structure of how that would, impact and start conversations, and different, based off of their conversations, they wanted certain like leads for different initiatives that were important to them. So our role was really to put that into formalized language that the students may not have been familiar with, like constitution and bylaw type of language, and then kind of check in with them. Hey, is this what you meant? So that obviously did get voted on and supported by NACE members, and was included in the constitution and bylaws, which was really nice. I think it was like 2 years after we had started the original discussions. So it was really nice to see that come together and give students a space to be heard.
I love that. And I love that the students have a voice. That's one thing that I'm trying to push. NACAD is coming up here in June, and I keep seeing students in different discords and on Twitter or X, like, should I come to this? And it's like, please come.
Mhm.
I think students should have more of a voice in these discussions. If they might not have the biggest sway, but I think that their voices need to be heard on panels
100%.
or in the chat, because that, I mean, they're here. We need to hear what their opinions are and how they want this space to grow as well, because we're here for them. I mean, we wouldn't be here without them.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a great. First of all, there's so many students who do like incredibly professional work, and they're just younger. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where I like to say you're a student. I feel like that should be like a badge of honor versus
Yes.
like, oh, well,
Yeah.
you're just a student, so we're going to disrupt you or something like that. So, and again, I might be rose-colored glasses with that because I'm sure there are plenty of students who have like negativity to them, whatever. But for the most part, I want to say that students have wonderful ideas, that they know these games better than most of us, and I think that there's and the community that is like around that game. So I think that it's quite frankly stupid if we don't keep them into that conversation, because we're missing the key component. You know, that's the keystone of the entire arch, is how can we serve these students. So I couldn't agree more. I think that it's very challenging for students to travel, to know that something exists, to have the funds to travel to that, to have the flexibility within their schedule to do so, and then have the confidence to do so. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think that there's, you know, I really wish that there were more online options or online tracks for students to take advantage of. But I think, you know, that just the whole like conference and convention um, space is very restrictive to people with money and
Yep.
people with funds. And that's an area when you talk about like DEI that I'm very passionate about, is just socioeconomic status, and this idea of like, I need X number of dollars in order to just talk. So I know that you do a great job, especially in esports and coffee. So if you're not on the server, you should totally be on the server. In trying to post different conferences, and you know, definitely if they're free and online, to get more information and really find that community that suits you best. So it's been great to kind of sift through those and see what makes sense for me, what I can forward to students or different interested parties, because I'm on like a lot of club you know, situations too. So so thanks for doing that.
You're welcome. Okay, so you sit on several boards and advisory committees. Can you go over some of the ones I have you for: NACE, Voice, and Riot? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with those and how they've been going?
Yeah, so I actually just got off of a NACE board of directors meeting, so that's kind of fresh on my mind. For NACE, I've been nominated before for the board. This was the first year that I actually stood for the nomination. And you know, I think for me this year, you know, so this was back in July, when I heard that I was nominated, I was like, well, you know, I know that this next academic year in particular,
That's not the
uh,
first time you've been nominated. I'm pretty sure
yeah,
you've
I
been
know,
nominated like 3 times, and it's the
I
first time
know.
you've accepted the nomination.
No, that's what I mean. Because Joey, I think Joey said that too, because he DM'd me to let me know. And I think you could scroll up and see the thank you, but no, Joey, thank you, but no, Joey. But yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of work. But the board itself is a lot of, I'm very fortunate to be seated next to the people that I am. I respect all of them. I think they come from a really great diversity of programs and situations. So we have, you know, I don't think necessarily contentious conversations, but we've definitely had disagreements, but I've never felt like, oh my gosh, this person is attacking me. It's always been kind of like changed my mind. And in some cases, my mind has been changed. In other cases, it hasn't been changed. I think like Eugene and I go toe to toe all the time, but I couldn't like find a better person to have a conversation with when it comes to collegiate esports. And I remember early on, he was one who was in, I think, one of the early NACE convention talks or something like that. And I was like, this guy and I are on the same page. And so I've been very much like a Eugene fan from day one. And finally got to meet him in person. It seemed kind of wild, actually, over the convention last summer, and give him like a big bear hug and just be like, it was just really nice to see people in person after working with them on pretty serious and heavy topics, and having a debate but not having a screaming match. And I think going back to like the NACE board, we all respect each other, and we respect where we're all coming from, and we recognize that having someone who is just like in that singular column is not healthy for NACE, right? Because we're such different programs across the board that's what we need as a board of directors, is to not just be all of the highest competitive program directors and they're on the board. And You're like, okay, but what about all of us, who are smaller programs or what have you? Where is our voice being heard? So that was sort of my longer story when it comes to NACE. But I do, I think that there's so many good people in NACE who volunteer their time to push the organization forward. So I'm very fortunate to be in some of those conversations and learn from such wonderful minds, and be led by Sari as our chair, has been so incredibly elegant, as she always is, in a beautiful way. And just learn more about other programs, and keep trying to pick apart all of these problems that come up, that is going to happen for any organization that's sort of doing the right thing, and headed for growth. So very fortunate to be among the people that I am.
I love that. Okay, let's get into you have other projects, personal projects, or what else do you want to talk about? Take up space.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many different interests that I am always learning, and I love learning. So it's kind of hard to pin me down a lot when it comes to just what am I working on. Currently, I'm not going to go. I'll stick more like esports related. But I know you and I have talked about a program that I'm still trying to sort of puzzle out. But one thing, from my past, is that my family was a foster care family. So it was respite care. So that just basically means kids who are in group homes would come to our house for like Thanksgiving or for Christmas, or usually like holidays, or like Memorial Day weekend or something like that, where they needed like a break, and just like a family engagement for a weekend or a week or something like that. So this was when I was in high school. So we got a family, 3 siblings, as like one of our first cases. And I'm like 15, 16 at the time. So it ended up being that they stayed with us for, I want to say, the better part of 6 months, if not longer than that. So it's just one of those things that happened. We wanted to make sure they had a solid place to stay while things were happening. So and we had a few other cases that would come to our house for different engagements and things like that. And I definitely don't know everything about that world, but it is something that impacted me. And specifically when I was as an undergrad, I was studying English and studio art, and my studio art was photography and film. So I did a senior honors thesis where I shot a documentary about juvenile justice and at-risk teens, and just kind of exploring what that meant in my local jurisdiction. So it's always just been this kind of evolving like low burn or like low boil in my mind of just like what we're failing these kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at some of the statistics, which I did sort of recently, for Pennsylvania at least, but I think this is a national problem. There's maybe 50% that graduate high school, and much less than that go on to undergraduate, being undergraduate degrees. And these are still very smart, intelligent, capable, and kids, and like there's just no support. So it's something that has always frustrated me. It's one of those things that I constantly sort of not this in particular, but just this idea of agency. I think about a lot, and for these huge problems that we have, and I think that there's a lot of just apathy as a result, because they're huge problems, and a person feels like, well, what am I going to do about it, right? What can I do? I can't just recycle, and that's going to fix like the problems that we have. They're just too big.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about that, because I do believe that one person can make a difference. And again, my rosy colored glasses might be on there, but I think to frame a difference, right? What does that mean to you? What are you trying? Are you trying to solve world hunger? Are you trying to solve like global warming? Like, what is it that you're trying to solve? And how can you make an impact there? And I think a lot of people end up feeling very much like they don't have an impact. But like, of course you do, it's like you impact, just like somebody has had an impact on your life. If you put that difference down to a degree that is achievable, and then that can escalate like nobody's business, so I do think there is something to agency, but I do struggle with that frequently in terms of convincing myself that is true. So with that in mind, I think I've sort of tricked myself into being like, well, just try it, right? Just see what you can do for one kid, see what you can do for, one group home, or whatever it is that, fill in the blank on what people listening are passionate about, or that thing that you just can't quite get out of your mind. And, it doesn't have to take 5 hours a week. It could be one event, but it's a step, and it's that step after step after step. And then you look behind you and you're like, wow, look how far I've come. And it doesn't really matter if that step isn't impactful or, ticks that box of like, yes, that problem is gone, because we are finite. We're not going to have this infinite impact. That's irrational to assume that. Well, and I don't know, maybe you are like, I don't mean to like limit you or whatever, but at the end of the day, I think it's a matter of scale, and it's a matter of understanding what your value is, and that I think it's I forget what the quote is, but it's one of those things where looking back, you're like, oh, if I would have just done this one thing, like I changed that one thing, then like everything would be different. But like nobody thinks, well, today if I just did that one thing, then I'll be different in the future. Like we're so obsessed with looking in the past and trying to clean up the past that I'm like, well, just do that thing now, and like do that thing and let those steps keep pushing you towards your goal. Because there's never, not that I've experienced, and maybe other people have different, I'm sure other people have different experiences than I do, but like I've never experienced a giant leap, where you just suddenly elevate to that like ultimate goal. It seems impossible, but like I feel like a lot of times we expect that, right? We expect that of ourselves, and we push these like really impossible goal sets, and if we don't hit them, we're like, well, there you go, like it wasn't meant to be. I shouldn't even have started. And you're like, well, come on, like give yourself a break, because it's if you think that you could have done one thing different in your past and that would have changed your entire life, then that gives you the agency to change your life tomorrow, to change your life 3 years from now. And it could be something totally small, or totally personal. Like I'm on a health journey of trying to like figure out what that means for me. And like I struggle with migraines, and that has been like an incredible journey to just get to a spot of being like pain-free. And I had no idea I was in constant pain until it went away. And then like I literally cried. I turned to my husband and I was like, I'm not in pain right now. And it was incredible to me. But like, if you don't take that step, be like, okay, well, I guess I'll call my doctor finally, because like it can be very debilitating. You're like, this happens all the time. And then like when you get that community that listens to you and says, yes, this is a problem, let's solve it together. And like, oh, maybe you need to go over here, or you need to do this, and whatever it is people are struggling with or is like occupying their mind, do something, right? Could be just one small thing, could be posting on the server like, hey, the Elevated Beans, we have that channel. It's like, hey, I'm trying to do this and I'm planning to do this. And then we check in with each other. And sometimes that's all you need, is just someone to be like, hey, did you get that done? And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I should. But that's again, that's a sign of a healthy community. I definitely derailed that conversation too.
Nope. I think that's why we made this series, and there's no right or wrong answer to any of our questions, because
I feel like I'm one of those people who you're like, tell me your name, and I'm like, well, let me tell you about my dog instead. Like, you did say that, and I do recognize that you said that, but let me just go over here.
It's okay. I feel like I do that too when people ask me questions. I'm like, wait, what was the question? Okay. We're gonna
I have to circle back.
Do one more question and then wrap up. But okay, so what's some advice you could give our community members who might want to start their own passion projects that you wish you would have known before you started one?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of the passion project that that would like suit this most neatly. Yeah, I feel like, as much as I appreciate that question, I feel like a lot of times people get stuck in that. And I don't want to be like all Nike and just do it, but I think there is something to that. I feel like anytime that I've had a project that I turn around and I'm like, you know what, I was proud of that. I think one of the longest things that happened was that like I went around and around and around and around and around, like, should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do this? Or like, this is why I shouldn't do this, or I don't have time to do this. And it's just kind of, like I said, just like taking one step, taking another step, taking another step, and just that increment of persistence, and consistency, and you're gonna mess up, and I think like I'll take my health journey, like me exercising, right? So Tuesday, Thursday, I try to exercise in the morning. There were like 2 weeks where I was like, I don't really want to do this, or like something happened. I had to take my daughter to the to the doctor, and then I was frustrated because I didn't get to work out, but it's not her fault, but not that I was frustrated at her, but just like the situation. And it's like, well, that happens though, like you can have these really wonderful intentions. You can have this perfect, it looks like Loctite schedule, and it's like, on Canva or whatever, like it's like a beautiful thing, but like life happens, and that's fine. Just like pivot and give yourself the grace to take a break and have life happen to you. Yep. Because otherwise, and I try to impress this on my students, but it's tough to see it, right? So I think it's important to have people in your life who have at least been through some stuff, like are older than you or more experienced than you. Doesn't necessarily have to be older, but who you can listen to for advice, but not just take that as like, well, this is what I need to do, right? Like listen to it, challenge it against your like core tenets, and then say, should I pick this up or should I drop this, right? And if you find that person who like, for me, I talk to my dad a lot about my professional career because he was also a professor. So I'm like, Dad, like I don't know about this, about the inner workings of, what this was when I was first starting out with teaching, like faculty meetings and, all these different processes and things. And of course we worked at different institutions, so it's different there too. But that idea of like listening to him and being like, okay, I see sort of what you're trying to say. I don't agree with it, so I'm going to let it go. But I appreciate the information. And there are other times that I'm like, that's very, very helpful for me and for my situation. So I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to adjust it a little bit for me, but I'm not just going to take what you tell me and then that's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like that's where it takes a lot of practice of not only getting those people, because you're going to have to at the beginning when you're first starting out, it's like you hear that information and you're like, I guess that's what I'm doing, because you don't have any experience.
Yep.
So you just kind of do it, and then you're like, oh, that was bad advice, or that didn't quite work out for me because of this, so I should have like tweaked that a little bit. And this helps you kind of hone in on the people in your life who you can go to for specific advice or a conversation. Like sometimes I just need to kind of talk something out because I have like a lot of ideas and they just need to kind of, I don't know, form in front of me so I can grab onto the things that make sense for what I'm trying to do or what I'm trying to articulate. So, you know, I think that process is really helpful to hone when you're thinking about like, I really want to do this thing, you know, then put yourself in a community who can help you towards that, you know, challenge you to not just be like, yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do this. And like, you need that for sure. But like, you don't want people to say, yes, you can do this, when inside they're like, they definitely cannot do this, you know? And like, that's not a friend. That's a yes man.
Yes.
And like, you know, that's going to be 100%. That's my sister. Right. So she's like the support person. She will tell me if I'm like way off base, but like if I'm like a foot off base, she's going to be like, you totally had it. You totally had it, because you need that person too. That's just like on your side, ride or die type of situation. But it's not always important to have those people like completely surrounding you because you're going to be off base.
Yep.
And so I think that's important to just build your community, take the steps towards your goal. And it can just be one step. It can be one step every week, every day, every 2 weeks. But like, if you don't take some steps sometimes, it's okay too, but just get back to it, you know, because the little stuff that you do is just going to bloom over time. And that's really the goal, right? Is just to have that growth in your personal life that can lead to fulfillment.
I know I talked to you a lot when I was teaching. It was more like me venting to you.
Hey, yes, we need that. We need that.
About some of my students. But I didn't feel like I had anyone else that felt like a safe space that I could talk to and ask questions. And I felt like that you were my person for that specific, that fulfilled a need for that. And we had great conversations.
We do have great conversations. It never stopped,
No.
Jacquie.
All right. Okay. Last minute. Do you have any plugs that you'd like to put out there? Where can we find you?
Oh, well, I'm on Esports and Coffee, so you can find me on there. I'm a lot of the, sorry, my phone's ringing. A lot of the projects that I'm doing, are always trying to elevate people. So, well, I don't want to say always, but that's one of my main motivating factors. So, you don't have to poke me too much to get me rattling. So find me on Esports and Coffee, and we can give it a chat. I'm always open to any type of conversation that's gonna express his opinions and learn more about how we can just do better, right?
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on our second episode of Corkboard Connections. I can't express how much I appreciate you as an individual, as a friend, and just having you on here. It means a lot to me.
It's incredible to hear that from you, from someone I respect so much and just enjoy being around. It's easy to be who I am around you and around a lot of the other, co-founders, founders, whatever you guys call it, the head baristas. And I think that's one of the things that makes Esports and Coffee so genuine. And I think that there's just so many spaces out there where people are trying to get your money and they're trying to get your information, and they're just trying to get something from you. And that's never the case that I've felt in Esports and Coffee. It's always been like, what can we do for this community? How can we build together? And it's really something that I think is beautiful and starting to really get some appropriate wind which is so fun to see when the good guys win, so to speak. So I appreciate that, and your consistency and ability to allow people to be themselves.
Thank you. We're gonna wave and say goodbye. All right, thank you everyone.
Cheers,
for
y'all.
joining us. We'll
Thanks.
see you next time on Corkboard Connections with AJ.